Okay, Scott, let's talk about some polarizing wide receivers. Don't think we can really go anywhere else, but we're going to have to talk about A.J. Brown in this video. We were talking about him a little bit before we started recording. Just hype is unreal. You have a real interesting spot where you saw him get taken in a startup, but I don't know. Do you want to add anything to the introduction? Anything to say?
Yeah, so anybody that listened to my most recent podcast, I just talked about receivers and what they did in 2019. And it really, it wasn't a shock to go through a lot of the data that I came up with. I went through and just tracked the weekly finishes, essentially just tracked the top 36 finishes for each week, and then tried to parse out, how frequently did each player finish in the top 36, top 30, or top 24, top 12, and then also just how deep the receiver position, I think, is the main takeaway from kind of where we're at right now. So I wanted just to go over, you mentioned A.J. Brown. I think that's the most, I say, the biggest riser from this past offseason. This was a guy that was going in the early to mid to late, even in Superflex first rounds of rookie drafts. He was going anywhere from like the 107 to the 111 or so in Superflex drafts. And right now I'm doing a startup and I saw A.J. Brown get picked. It's a 12-team, 2-quarterback, 2-tight end league. He got picked at the 303. So the 27th player off the board. This draft did include the rookie picks in the draft as well. And in a 2-quarterback league, you kind of look at those first couple rookie picks as essentially quarterbacks. So they were jumped off the board pretty quickly. But, how far I know I told you this before we started recording, how far A.J. Brown has come with me. He got drafted over Juju Smith-Schuster, Amari Cooper, Odell Beckham, Chris Godwin, DJ Moore, and then even further down, Kenny Golladay, Cortland Sutton, Cooper Kupp, Keenan Allen, Stephon Diggs. I mean, essentially the entire, receiver 6 through 20 of last year's ADP all went behind A.J. Brown. So, I mean, that, to me, I love A.J. Brown, but to me, if you're getting that type of price, the move to make is and really there was only one receiver last year that stood out from the rest. I mean, it was clearly Michael Thomas. His season was just absolutely incredible. I mean, one of the best receiver seasons that we've ever seen. He was the only receiver that actually posted at least a top 3 week or a top 36 week every 14 weeks out of 15. That he played for fantasy. So, I mean, just amazing consistency week to week. I mean, his floor every single week is just incredible. So I think he's a clear outlier. But after that, the main thing is where can you find value with these guys? Unless it's a clear cut, absolute top end stud. I still think someone like DeAndre Hopkins or Tyreek Hill or Devontae Adams all kind of fit in that mold. But after that, as you go down, you get into the range like someone like A.J. Brown. If you can trade, if you can pivot down to, if you can find somebody that really, really is polarized on one of these guys and they just love A.J. Brown, they're willing to give you anything. I don't see a reason why you don't trade, A.J. Brown for another receiver. They can give you similar consistency or similar production and try to get something on top of it. Because unless you can project A.J. Brown to get 160 plus targets in the couple seasons going forward, I don't see how he can ever get any valued higher than he is right now. Because basically he's getting valued at, his absolute ceiling, a lot of times probably because of his age.
I mean, I think it's like a little just biased and like a little emotional for me, but I agree that would probably be the smart thing to do is pivot down and maybe pick up an extra first. But I would be running to the Juju owner and just sending that offer straight up. I would just love to get Juju for A.J. Brown just because, I mean, A.J. Brown, he was amazing down the stretch, but it's not like he was getting targets or anything. I mean, he at his best, he still wasn't a target hog, and he was just being extremely efficient with his targets, which obviously you want to see. But at the same time, I would rather see more consistency and a higher volume going to that wide receiver. But that's just unreal to me.
Well, and I think that that if you listen to a podcast I recommend is the Late Round Quarterback podcast that JJ Zacharyson just did today.
Mm-hmm.
And it was basically titled Wide Receivers Are Dead. And this was exactly his point, was that if you look at the trends over the last, even he went through and did the last decade, but basically the targets are going down and down and down for the elite guys. And the number of middle tier receivers in terms of their volume and their involvement is going up and up and up. And that's what this data that I have shows. I mean, if you just looked at, I mean, I would say 1 week where a receiver has a big play, you can be a wide receiver 3 by having one big play. I mean, you can literally be a special teams guy that plays 4 snaps on offense. But then if you hit one big play, you know, an 80-yard touchdown, you're immediately a wide receiver 3 for a week. So I think that's a fluke. But just taking the data from this year, I mean, there were 75 receivers that had at least 3 weeks of a wide receiver 3 or better.
Wait, 3 weeks?
3 weeks or better. They finished in the top 36, 75 different players. So
that's ridiculous.
I mean, that's 20% of your fantasy season. And so if you go down the ADP list, I mean, you could go down some of the names that are, you know, listed in here that put together these weeks. I mean, we're talking, you know, I can throw out names, and there are a lot of guys that they weren't even ranked in terms of top 100 receivers coming into the year. And so what that tells me is not necessarily to go buy these players, but it tells me that, you know, you can definitely take a volume over quantity or quality approach at the receiver position. And so where it becomes really applicable, I think, for dynasty owners is if you're playing in a league where you can start 7 receivers, it just goes a little bit deeper. But if you're playing in a league where you can start maybe 4 or 5 receivers, the idea is being that outside of those really, really top end elite guys, you know, your Michael Thomases, or, you know, from year to year, someone like Julio Jones or DeAndre Hopkins, or, you know, the guys with elite ceilings like Tyreek Hill. Outside of those guys, basically I look at it as everybody else is the same. You know, everyone else has a similar consistency from week to week. You know, you may be lucky to get 2/3 of your weeks are startable, are flexible for everybody else. So, you know, if you see a guy like A.J. Brown that all of a sudden, unless you consider him to be in that absolute elite tier, which he might do. I mean, he absolutely might do. But you need the volume to be there. I mean, A.J. Brown could have a wide receiver 4 overall season next year, but he could do it on 132 targets or something. I'm not going to bank on that from season to season, especially not in the offense that he's currently in. So I think that's the move, is if you can find these pivots to where you can say, you know, I can trade the wide receiver 10 for the wide receiver 20 and pick up a high second round pick because the guy who really wants my wide receiver 10, he's willing to give me something extra. There's a good chance that I don't lose anything from production next year. I mean, basically they could swap. The wide receiver 20 could be the wide receiver 10 next year. Just depends on matchups, depends on quarterback play. But a lot of it's just week to week. I mean, a lot of it is who do they play? What cornerbacks are they going up against? But there's just the only thing you're paying for with someone like A.J. Brown, or, you know, just like last year with Juju. What were you paying for in Dynasty for Juju? You were paying for his age. You were paying for what he did at such a young age. Had he been 26, you know, the stats he put up were great, but they weren't, you know, hey, this is the best receiver ever type value. So really, what are you paying for with these guys? And so I look at it and say, you know, I'm playing in like a 2 or 3 year window. I know you've talked about that before too. So don't pay for the hype. Don't pay for the age. So if you can swap out, you know, A.J. Brown for Juju Smith-Schuster and get something on top of it, then do it. But I think the better pivot is like, you know, what can you get on top of A.J. Brown for like Odell Beckham? Because you're taking risk with Beckham. You know, he's going to be 27 years old. You know, you're taking risk with that type of player. But, you know, I think those are the moves you can make that in a year from now, you can pop that trade up on the screen and say, oh yeah, you know, I got a first rounder in Odell Beckham for A.J. Brown. And Odell could be smashing A.J. Brown in 2020. And you're sitting there going like, who's the fool that made that trade? Those are the type of moves that you're going to see because, you know, from year to year, I think A.J. Brown has a good chance to be a consistent top 24 receiver for the next 7 years. But I'm not paying for wide receiver 6. I'd rather pay for him when he's wide receiver 24, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So going along with that, are you like just completely ignoring the wide receivers like in that Stephon Diggs range now? Because that's one guy that I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on going into 2020.
So I think that like in this startup draft, we're through 8 rounds and I haven't drafted a receiver yet. And part of that is the format. But part of that is I think that the position after the top 4 or 5 is so deep. You know, you get down to, you know, players that could easily take a jump up in terms of next year that I don't think their values have adjusted enough. I mean, you still have guys like Curtis Samuel that depending on what they do with their their new head coach and what quarterback they potentially have. I think Curtis Samuel's a guy that could easily go from right now, he's wide receiver 39. He could easily jump up into, the Calvin Ridley, Terry McLaurin, Tyler Boyd type range. And you can get him at a little bit cheaper price. Now, do you want to bank on that? No, but I think there can be a lot of values that can be had kind of in that lower tier range. And to me, a lot of those they're all basically lumped into the same category. It's all preference based. So I'm really focusing on building my teams around, sure, if I can get DeAndre Hopkins or if I can get Michael Thomas, especially, he's not a guy that I would buy now because he costs so much. But if I can build around one of those studs, I'll wait till the end of the tier in that second tier. And yeah, I'll take a guy like Allen Robinson or, Kenny Golladay or Cortland Sutton. I'll take them at the back of that second tier. And then I'll just backfill it with what I think is good value players or players that I think could ascend their value next year. One guy I'm really intrigued about is Robbie Anderson. I think that him being a free agent and, I can see him moving on to a place that, he could be the next guy that kind of escapes the Adam Gase stranglehold and ends up taking a jump. I don't think he's ever going to be like a wide receiver one, but I could easily see him being in the range of like a Tyler Lockett or someone like that. So I'm more focused on right now, if I'm doing a startup, building my teams around those types of guys and then just kind of punting the ones that have all the hype.